Welcome to our last session of Finding God in Your Field. Hopefully this is really more of a starting point than an ending for these conversations. And what I'd like to talk about in this one is hopeful thriving and long-term impact, and imagining a really big vision for the future for what God will do, but also having some very doable beginning steps. So one of my own surprise discoveries in graduate school was hope. My department and advisor are wonderful, and I'm very thankful for my grad school experience, especially as it's grown over the years. But I had a very difficult period in the middle. Like a lot of people, I realized that I actually had no idea how to write a dissertation. And that was a pretty scary realization, because I thought of being a writer as a big part of my identity. And so it was really a struggle at that moment. And it felt impossible to make progress for a while. And as the size of that challenge for me at that time sank in, I realized that I was actually pretty lacking in the virtue of hope in general, not just in graduate school, but kind of in a lot of places in my life. In fact, I realized I'd been misunderstanding the nature of hope for years. I discovered in that process that hope as Christians understand it isn't just sort of the wish that something good might happen eventually. It's the deeply cultivated trust that God is going to do something amazing. Now, it's not always the amazing thing that we ask him for. It's not always the thing that we're expecting, but it is something incredible. And I realized to have that kind of hope, I also had to cultivate my imagination and grow my ability to see beyond my immediate experience and believe in what God will do. And that's what we're going to work toward in our last session. We'll try to cultivate that imaginative hope for good things that could come from our work over time. So I'd like to share a little more of my story and one example of a Christian scholar who I think has been able to have some really wonderful impacts for the common good through his work. And then I'd like to share some doable starting points that we've curated as possible follow-ups to help continue this conversation. So one thing Scripture tells us is that God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think. And that turned out to be incredibly true of my graduate school experience. In the midst of the deep difficulty I was describing, I felt lost and I didn't know what to do. So I reached out to some people who cared about me, and I asked them to pray specifically for my dissertation. So about once a month, I would send them an email update, and it would have prayer requests like, I need to figure out which form to submit for this part of the process. And I need to write one crucial transition paragraph on page 3. And to my amazement, I would send an email and the thing I asked for would happen, often within a week, over and over and over again. Now, it is important to say here that there have been plenty of periods in my life where I've prayed for a long time, asking God for a thing that he hasn't done or hasn't done for many years. Prayer is very mysterious and it grows us in many ways, even when it doesn't seem to be answered directly. But in this experience, God did what I asked over and over. And I grew so much in hope. I grew so much in community, and I grew so much in my academic work through that process. And I couldn't see how at the time, but I knew that for me, finishing the PhD was a calling, was something I needed to do, however hard it was. Now, that's not true for everyone. Sometimes God does call us to leave a graduate program, but I knew it was true for me. I just couldn't see how for a long, long time. And a lot of the process was cultivating small disciplines step by step, crafting one sentence or faithfully editing a page, going through the daily grind that we've been talking about in some of the questions. And very doable disciplines were helpful, like praying for one sentence at a time or one paragraph at a time, or asking for someone's prayer. That was often the way I could connect faith and work at that time. But over the long arc of the process, I saw this real and deep transformation. And looking back now, finishing grew the skills and virtues that I needed to do almost everything I do today vocationally. And amazingly, this doesn't happen forever, but it also grew my skills to communicate in relationships and improved a lot of friendships and other relationships in my life. And it helped me develop ideas that I'm still coming back to about 10 years after finishing. I didn't see how any of that was going to work when I was stuck in the middle, but God did it. So today we're going to take some time and try to cultivate our imaginative hope for the good that could come from our work over the long term. And I'd like to point you to one specific scholar who I think really is an encouraging example on this front. Someone mentioned him in the chat earlier. So Francis Su is a Christian scholar who has figured out some amazing ways to use his skills and knowledge for the good of everyone, really. So one thing you may enjoy is he shared the lesson of grace in teaching, which is a reflection on how ideas of grace, how he applies those in his classroom. He also served his field as the president of the Mathematical Association of America. And he's recently written a Yale University Press book that we mentioned yesterday in questions, I think, about how math can help everyone flourish. I'm in the humanities, so some of my friends need a little bit of convincing on that front, and Francis Su is the scholar to convince them. And so I think that Francis is a great example of some of the amazing impacts that thinking about these things over the long haul can have. There are a lot of others. I wish I had more time to share them. But I wanted to move on before we break into small groups and share an invitation to some doable next steps on connecting faith and work. Now, this list is not exhaustive. If you have other ways of taking next steps, we fully and deeply support that. I think there's a developing the Christian Mind group that we're going to hear a little bit more about, and that could also be a wonderful next step. But we've curated a list of steps roughly in order from most doable to most involved. And we hope that you can take next steps with some of these. And the idea here is we think each of these things on its own might be helpful, but they're also what I like to call modular and coherent. So individually, we hope they're going to support you. And also the more of them you do, the more of a whole experience you get of putting some of these things together. So that's kind of the goal in the way that we've imagined them. So the first thing you can do is join Emerging Scholars Network. This is definitely very easy. It's free. You just fill out one online form and we'll send you a follow-up email that makes it really easy to find that link. And at Emerging Scholars Network, we support early career Christian scholars across kind of that whole arc of starting by figuring out if you want to go to grad school up through getting tenure or taking those skills somewhere else as a research professional. And we collaborate a lot with our colleagues in local InterVarsity groups. And if you sign up for that, you'll get a monthly email that shares events and links to new content on the blog and things like that to support you in your journey as Christian scholars. Two things worth mentioning. There's a very rich archive of more Scholars Compass articles at the blog, and also a series of prayers for field areas that can help when you're having those everyday blog experiences of just trying to get through. And we also are able to provide from time to time some conference funding to attend faith and science conferences. And when you get to faculty stage, we have an early career faculty grant as well. So that's very easy. It's clicking one link and filling out an online form. The next thing that I'd love to encourage you to do is to start a Scholars Compass small group. So I'll be sending out a guide for doing a short 3 to 5 meeting group on your campus and exploring some of these things a little bit more deeply to make it as easy as possible to start that. And if you're interested in a guide for the whole semester, let me know. We could probably create that too. And then the third thing is we would love for you to come to the Early Career Faith and Science track that InterVarsity's Emerging Scholars Network is running in collaboration with American Scientific Affiliation. That will be at the last weekend of July in San Diego, so it's easy to get to, or relatively easy to get to. And Francis Su will be a speaker, so it's a great chance to hear from him. And we have typically had very good travel and conference funding, so we can usually make it pretty easy to go financially for grad students. And then the last idea on our curated list is to have a Square Inch Stories workshop. So Square Inch Stories was piloted here in the Bay Area, and I believe the Stanford grad group can tell you what they've done with it. But it's a TED Talk style format about connecting faith and work. So if you took something like a Scholar's Compass entry and expanded it to a TED Talk and did it together as a conference, that's Square Inch Stories. And it's been a format that's been great for starting conversations and practicing how we talk about these things and refining ideas and sharing it with friends. So we'll send a follow-up email that has easy follow-up steps on all of these things. And we hope you'll do one of these or some other specific way to keep applying these ideas in your experience over the course of the semester and beyond. So having given you some ways to take those steps, we're now going to split into small groups again, and we're going to read Thanksgiving, Expect the Unexpected by Alice Brown Collins. And in this, Dr. Brown Collins tells us some stories about her own experience of God doing amazing things in her life, and kind of contextualizes thinking about hope when we're having difficulties to the academic life. So as before, do your intros, choose a Google Docs note taker, read together, and then discuss your questions. And remember to put any questions for me in the questions section of that doc, and we'll try to answer a few of them at the end of the session.